Hail, fellow travelers. Tim from Secret Fire Books here with my monthly reading report, this time for the month of March 2025. And that makes 12 reading report videos here on the channel. So if you've watched this, that means that you are fully caught up on everything that I have read for the past year. Isn't that awesome? I know. So exciting. I'm so proud of you guys for following me on this journey. Aren't you lucky to have this insider information? In all seriousness, March was a pretty good reading month for me. There was one or two things that I'll probably get to, but for the most part, I really enjoyed what I read this past month. The first thing that I did in March was I got started with a reading project that I set for myself at the end of February. I decided to, if you don't know at this point, if you somehow not heard here on the channel, I started a reading project where I planned on reading all 22 books in the Redwall series by Brian Jacques. It is a big old young adult, middle grade fantasy series that I loved as a kid, but I never finished it. And I wanted to find out what the other books in the series were like, and also to reread the first several books that I'd read as a kid to see if they still held up. So that reading project's probably going to take up the majority of 2025 for me. But I knocked out the first 3 books in March. To be fair, I started reading the first book, Redwall, on, I think, like February 25th or 26th or something like that. Last couple days of February. But I count it as a March read. So the first one that I read was Redwall, which, again, I'm kind of ticked off that I can't find the old dust jacket for this book, but that's fine. And then I read book 2, Mossflower, and book 3, Madameo. And I did reviews for all 3 of these books here on the channel, so if you want my in-depth opinions, go ahead and look up those reviews. I will say for now that Redwall definitely lived up to my memories, my fond childhood memories. Mossflower had some fun bits, but was mostly a slog. And then Madameo brought me right back in and got me excited for the series again. So yeah, those were fun. I also read 2 books for the Elusive Exclusive Book Society, the book club live stream that I host alongside my friends Jake from Pulp Mortem and Nick from the Book Graveyard. The first one, or the one that we read, the one that we reviewed in March, was this book, Ellis Peters' A Morbid Taste for Bones. This is the first book of her Chronicles of Brother Cadville series, which is a big old kind of historical murder mystery series set in 12th century England. This first one takes place in Wales, actually, but it's in and around the British Isles in the 12th century. This was my pick. We reviewed it on my channel, and I actually really enjoyed this book. I had a lot of fun with it. It didn't blow my mind or anything, but it was a fun little cozy mystery. I enjoyed it quite a bit. My dad got a little overzealous and bought this entire series for me for my birthday in February. So I have all 21 of the books, and I decided to read the first one for Ebes. And we were joined by Brian from Bad Taste Books, who's a good friend of the channel and a good friend of all of us. He's awesome. We love Brian so much. We've said multiple times that he's kind of like the unofficial 4th member of the Elusive Exclusive Book Society. So we love having him on board. And we also had, as a special guest, Ben from Grammaticus Books. We've been trying to get Grammaticus on for a long time, ever since we started having guests on the show back in, I think it was June or July of last year. We've been wanting to get Grammaticus on board, so it was fun having him review this book with us. And also my dad, who pretty much started this whole thing, he jumped on board as well, and he read this book, and he reviewed it with us. And it was a lot of fun. I like how much he enjoyed hanging out with the guys. He got on with everybody pretty well. And he didn't embarrass me all that much. He kept the embarrassing dad stuff to a minimum on that live stream, so I'm very proud of him. So yeah, a lot of fun. Morbid Taste for Bones. I will definitely get around to some of the other books in the Brother Cadville series at some point in the future. The second Ebes book that I read this month, which we will be reviewing on April 5th, Saturday, April 5th, is The Parasaurians by Robert Wells. Now, this was Jake's pick. It is a science fiction novel from 1969. We'll be reviewing it on his channel, Pulp Mortem. And we'll have, as a special guest, we'll have Richard from Vintage SF, which I'm very excited to talk to him about that. It's going to be fun picking his brain, because this book was, I don't want to say too much, but it's rather fitting that this book is falling apart. I actually, Actually had to kind of speed read this book to make sure I finished it before it just disintegrated in my hands. But it was interesting. I will give it that. We'll see. We'll see what everyone else thinks on Eves. So that'll be on Jake's channel on April 5th. That's Saturday, 7 p.m., 6 p.m. Central. We'll be joined by Richard from Vintage SF. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then the other whole book that I read, the only book that I finished aside from those in March, was Kothar, Barbarian, Swordsman. I have dabbled in Gardner F. Fox's short stories before. I've read some of his comic books. I've never read one of his novels, though, so I went ahead and picked this up randomly one day, finished it in a day. It was a great little read. Not anything mind-blowing, again, but it was fun. It was a solid sword and sorcery fix-up novel. And I did a full review for this on the channel as well, so check that out if you've not already. Highly recommend it to anyone who is a fan of old-fashioned heroic fantasy. I also read quite a few short stories this past month. The first one was out of this anthology that was sent to me by Michael K. Vaughan. This is Swords Against Darkness, edited by Andrew J. Offit. It's a nice little anthology of sword and sorcery, heroic fantasy, pulp fantasy stories written by several prominent fantasy and science fiction authors at the time of its publication. And the story that I picked out of this one was The Straggler from Atlantis by Manly Wade Wellman. I've mentioned before that I need to read Manly Wade Wellman, and so I picked up this and checked out the story Straggler from Atlantis, which was pretty good. It's a pretty simple, straightforward kind of fantasy story. It really reminded me of kind of like Greek mythology, stories of Perseus and Hercules doing great deeds and winning the admiration of the people, that kind of thing. It's about this titular straggler from Atlantis, this guy named Cardios, who survives the sinking of Atlantis. He washes on shore somewhere, and they actually go into detail what happened to Atlantis, how it got sunk, and his involvement in its sinking, which is this kind of darkly comical, darkly romantic little aspect that I really appreciated. But he washes up on shore, and he's taken in by these people, these giants who call themselves the Nephil, which, if you don't know, that's, I'm assuming, a reference to the Nephilim from the Old Testament in the Bible. I thought that was pretty cool. And they are these big 12-foot tall people. They say that they are, descendants of the gods who mated with the most beautiful and powerful humans of the olden days, which is also a reference to the Nephilim from the Old Testament, which is pretty cool. And they have this problem. A few weeks before Cardios washed up onto their shores, a meteor came crashing to Earth outside their village. And the meteor broke open, and this thing crept out of it. This gelatinous, oozy monster that they call Fifth. Not fifth, like number 5, but Fifth. F-I-T-H. Fifth. And they tried to kill it, but it proved too quick for them. It's a shapeshifter. It can change its form very quickly. It flows like water, as they say. You get the sense that it's just this big blob-like thing that kind of slithers around and changes shape constantly. And they're too slow for it. The Nephil are too tall and too slow to catch this thing. And so it's kind of just been let loose in the land, and they allow it to devour their livestock as a sort of tribute, so it'll stay away from their village. But they don't want to keep doing this because obviously one day they will run out of livestock and they'll have to start feeding themselves to this thing, and they don't want any of that. And what makes it worse is that it's only active during the night. During the day, it hides in this hole in the ground, and the only entrance to this cave is this tiny little space that none of them can fit into. But they figured that this normal-sized guy, Cardios, can help them out with that. And so, in order to thank them for their hospitality, he takes it upon himself to squeeze into this tiny hole, go into this this creature's cave, and confront it for them. So, like I said, it's a fairly simple kind of questing fantasy sword and sorcery story, but it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed Manly Wade Wellman's style. He has a nice, succinct, punchy, pulpy style that I really enjoy. I still need to read his Silver John stories because I hear really good things about those. But this was a nice little introduction to his stuff. And there's some other cool stories in this book that I need to check out eventually. So I will get back to that sometime soon. I also read quite a few short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. By the time I upload this, I will probably have already made this into a Random Book Wednesday review, where I talk about this illustrated edition of Edgar Allan Poe's stories that I picked up lately. And so I've been rereading some of the stories that I've read before. I haven't read any Edgar Allan Poe since I was like 13 or 14, sometime in middle school or in high school, something like that. But yeah, I've been refamiliarizing myself with Edgar Allan Poe. I reread The Telltale Heart because, of course, that's awesome. It's an awesome, awesome story. By the way, I learned about this from Kevin Toll Reads. He's the one who informed me about this, so I feel like I should pass on this information to you guys. There is a recording, an audio recording of The Telltale Heart that's available on YouTube for free, and it's narrated by Christopher Lee. It is the most gnarly thing I've ever listened to. It's amazing. Listening to Count Dooku read The Telltale Heart is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. It's awesome. But I reread Telltale Heart. It was a lot of fun, as always. I also reread Mask of the Red Death, which is a fantastic story. Very short story, but has a really gruesome ending. And I reread The Raven because, of course, every Edgar Allan Poe collection has to have The Raven. And the one story that I'd never read before that I checked out for the first time was The Premature Burial, which is a pretty interesting story. It starts off in a weird way with the narrator just kind of listing all these events, these historical events where people have been buried alive. But eventually it makes sense. We get around to the point that this narrator is deathly afraid of being buried alive. He has feverish nightmares of being buried by his friends and family before his time of death. And so he takes several precautions to make sure that doesn't happen. And I won't spoil it, but how all of that ends up for him is pretty interesting. It has this kind of darkly comical ending that I thought was really cool. So yeah, Edgar Allan Poe is always fun. I enjoyed reading some of his stuff once again. I read some comics in March as well. I haven't read any manga in a while. I need to get back on my reread of Full Metal Alchemist because I didn't read any Full Metal in March. I need to make up for that. But I did read some comics. I was looking through my comic book shelf over here, and right next to it was a big stack of trades that I had not sorted through in a while. And at the very bottom were these 2 volumes, and I was like, I don't remember those. What are those? And then I picked them up and realized, oh wait, I remember these. It's Headlopper, baby. So if you don't know what Headlopper is, it is a sword and sorcery fantasy action comic by Andrew MacLean. It was originally self-published, I believe. I think Andrew MacLean published the first 2 issues of the series independently, and then Image Comics came and picked it up and turned it into a quarterly series. And it's a very brutal, very goofy, but very brutal sword and sorcery series about this guy, Norgal the Headlopper, the son of the Minotaur, the Executioner, the Headlopper. And I read this first volume, Headlopper and the Island or the Plague of Beasts, several years ago, and I really enjoyed it. And I never got around to the second volume, Crimson Tower, which I did read just a few days ago, thankfully. And these are a ton of fun. I'm not going to talk too much about them now, because I want to do a full review of these. I want to get the other 2 volumes in the series. The 4th one came out in 2021, and I don't think there's been any other material since then. I don't know if Andrew MacLean plans on continuing the series, but I want to get the other 2 volumes before I do a video on these. They're a lot of fun. Just know for now that these books are a ton of, you know what, I'll show off some of the art because it's super, super cool. Oh yeah, here we go. So yeah, Andrew MacLean's art style is very unique, though I will say it kind of reminds me of a mix between Genndy Tartakovsky, the creator of Samurai Jack and Dexter's Laboratory and some other cartoons from the early 2000s that I grew up on, as well as a little bit of Mike Mignola. If you can see the end papers here, those are very reminiscent of some Mike Mignola Hellboy art. In fact, I think Mike Mignola did a pinup in this collection. Yeah, he did. Here it is. So yeah, here's Mike Mignola's version of Norgal and Agatha the Blue Witch, which that's an interesting character that I'll definitely get into when I review these. So yeah, Headlopper by Andrew MacLean. A lot of fun. I will definitely say if you like fantasy comics, sword and sorcery, if you love old school Conan comics, Savage Sword and that kind of stuff, you should give these a shot. They are super duper cool. I feel like I use the words fun and cool way too much in my videos. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm a writer. I should know how to use different words to express different ideas. Use your words, Tim. But moving on, these are the things that I'll be reading soon. This is my sort of TBR, I guess you could say. The first thing on my TBR is Carl Edward Wagner, Death Angel's Shadow. Yes, this is a collection of 3 short stories starring his character Cain the Mystic Swordsman. This was also sent to me by Michael K. Vaughn. Again, Michael, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You are oh so generous, and I am very glad to finally have my hands on a Carl Edward Wagner book, because they are very hard to come by. So yeah, this is a collection of Cain's short stories. My good friend Eric Wag actually did a review of this book recently. He said it was awesome, and it made me want to read this even more. So it has shot up on my TBR, and it's going to be the book that I read next. I'm looking forward to it. I have not actually read any of the short stories yet, but I did read a bit of the prologue for the short story. What's it called? Reflections for the Winter of My Soul. So yeah, I read the first couple pages of this introduction, and it seems very cool. I feel like I use the words fun and cool way too much. So I'm excited to dig into some Carl Edward Wagner. And after that, oh boy. After that, I'm gonna be keeping my promise to another friend of mine. Ira from SF Words of Wonder sent me some books a while ago, and among them was this book, Starfighters by Robert E. Mills. And as you can tell from this cover, it is part of a trilogy. It's actually the second book in a trilogy that is a blatant ripoff of Star Wars. It came out around the same time as the original Star Wars. And on the back, I didn't notice this until I picked it up today. On the back, the blurb says, "The Dark Empire Strikes Back."
You gotta be kidding.
I don't know how more on the nose you can get. But then I looked at the publication date. This came out in 1978. That's a year after the original Star Wars. And what is it, like 2-3 years before Empire actually came out? So yeah, I don't know who's copying who in this case. But I told Ira I would read this and do a review, so I will definitely do that. I'm dreading this experience, especially since it's the second book in a trilogy, so I'm going to have no idea what's going on. But I'll power through, and I'll do the review for you, Ira. And then after I read Starfighters, I'll get back to my Redwall project. The next Redwall book I'll be reading is Book 4, Mariel of Redwall. I'm hoping to knock out 3 more of these books this month, but we'll see what happens. After that will be Book 5, Salamandastron, which is actually the first Redwall book I ever read. I don't remember much about it, but it must have been good because it turned me on to the rest of the series. And then if I can squeeze it in, I will also get in Book 6, Martin the Warrior. I do remember most of the story of this one, and it's pretty good from what I remember. There's some dark stuff going on in this book. It's pretty traumatic for a kid's novel, but I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, that's everything that I read in March, and that's everything that I plan to read this April. Let me know in the comments, guys. Have you read any of those books? What do you think of them? And until next time, as always, farewell and keep reading.